service or go to westmeadows.org/nextsteps. For now, let's hear this week's message.
Good morning again. Well, I'm not speaking again. I know you were really excited there for a second. But now you're even more excited because we have our good friend and member here, Sean Cullen, who's a caregiver to those in the Power to Change organization. He's a guy who is a deep thinker and a great speaker, hopefully, right? Yeah, great speaker. Yeah, really good. And he's here to continue on our series in David this morning. So welcome. Blessings.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, as Andrew said, my name is Sean. For those who don't know me, my family, we sit up there in the balcony most Sundays, and we've been attending here at West Meadows since 2007, so some time. Grew up in Southern Ontario, but Nancy and I moved out here in 2007. We had one child then, Abby, and have had 4 children since, 4 more children here in Edmonton. And so Sam, Bethany, Madeline, and Lydia. And all of our kids enjoy attending here, and I'm just so appreciative that they've all grown up in this church, physically, spiritually, and I thank you so much for your support in caring for our family as part of you. Through those years, I've had various roles in the church. Right now, I'm serving at the long-term care, with the long-term care team, just going once a month to speak to folks living in long-term care around our church here. So that's been a real joy, and certainly encourage anyone who wants to be involved in that. It's a lot of fun to meet with those folks and minister to them. I have worked with Power to Change, formerly Campus Crusade for Christ, for 25 years. I spent 7 years ministering to university students in Southern Ontario and was offered a regional role with Western Canada, directing our ministries in Western Canada, which is why we moved to Edmonton in the first place, so that I could travel from Winnipeg to Victoria, ministering to university students here. Shortly after that, I actually became the national director of Power to Change, our university ministry, and I spent a lot of time traveling all across the country and around the world, learning and talking and teaching and ministering to university students. And almost potential director who sits with missionaries, particularly the staff of Power to Change, who are ministering to university students across this country. And I sit with them as a spiritual director and create space for them to meet with Jesus, or potentially meet with Jesus. My role is to facilitate the space. And what I've found over the last number of years as I enter into this new role is that missionaries, maybe a lot like pastors and maybe even a lot like you, struggle to find a place where they can feel safe, to be honest in their journey with Jesus. Because there are times, even as missionaries, that they sense that God is far from them, that they've been abandoned, that they're alone, that they're doing the work and God's not paying attention. And they don't know where to say that. They don't know where to say that because they have all these supporters who are giving of their finances to give them a role, a job. And so they don't feel like they're quite free to share that kind of information with them, because it's like, oh, I don't know where God is, but I keep doing the work. They don't want to share that with their staff team necessarily, or with the students that they're ministering to. And so I come into those places and give them a freedom just to be who they are, to be honest about their walk with the Lord, and to create space for them to wrestle with, where is God in my life? And often we find him, and sometimes we don't. And yet there's a real joy in that process. There's kind of 2 big words that kind of have dominated my ministry in the last number of years. The first word is consolation. Consolation is an old theological term that simply means that God is near. It's the sense that God is close, that God is present. And there's a joy in that. It sometimes happens when everything is going well and God is close and life is awesome. Sometimes Life is going really poorly, and yet still there's a sense of consolation. There's a sense that God is in the stuff with us. And then there's desolation. Desolation is just the opposite. It's the sense that God is far, that he's not close, that we can't find him, that we don't know what he's up to. And sometimes that can happen when life is great. Everything can just be going great, but there's something about God that seems to be hidden from us. He's not close. And it can also, and maybe more frequently, happen when we sense that the world is closing in around us, where things are going poorly, where we're in distress, and we wonder where God is. And so this experience of consolation and desolation are true experiences. We all experience them at some point in our life, maybe multiple times in our life. There's long seasons of consolation and desolation, and there's little points of consolation and desolation throughout our day. But when we're honest with ourselves, it's true. This happens to us. And so where do we turn when we're in those moments of desolation, where we sense that we're alone and God has abandoned us? What do we do? Well, I do believe there is a place in Scripture that we can go that teaches us what to do when we're in those places. And we're going to look at David and some of the times he found himself in those places of desolation. And we're going to look particularly at Psalm 142 today. And in fact, there's many Psalms that have this theme, and we're going to talk a little bit about this theme of desolation or disorientation is the word I'm going to use more today. This sense of being disoriented, where everything doesn't really make sense and God seems far. Another word that is used is lament, a season of lament, Psalms of lament. And so this is one of those Psalms in Psalm 142. Let me read it for you today. Psalm 142. With my voice I cry out to the Lord. With my voice I plead for mercy to the Lord. I pour out my complaint before him. I tell my trouble before him. When my spirit faints within me, you know my way. In the path where I walk, they have hidden a trap for me. Look to the right and see, there is none who takes notice of me. No refuge remains to me. No one cares for my soul. I cry to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Attend to my cry, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my prosecutors, for they are too strong for me. Bring me out of prison, that I may give thanks to your name. The righteous will surround me, for you will deal bountifully with me. This is the reading from Psalm 142. That is the story, and we've been doing this series, which I've been enjoying, the rest of the story. What was happening in David's life when he wrote this? When he wrote this psalm that is filled with a sense of abandonment, loneliness, and seeking refuge and deliverance. Well, it's written when he was in a cave. There's a little subscript in the passage that he wrote this when he was in the cave. And there's a cave in David's story, the cave of Adullam. And this was during the season when David was on the run. We've been talking a lot about David's story, so I'm not going to rehash his whole life story, but we know that he was anointed king as a young man, even before Saul had finished being king. And he defeated Goliath, and he was rising in popularity and in power in the kingdom. And Saul got very jealous, and he threatened his life, and so David had to go on the run. And while he was on the run, one of the places he found refuge was in the cave near Adullam. This was not far from the Philistine border, and so it was a place where Saul had trouble getting to him, because if he mobilized his whole army, then the Philistines might attack, and there's just, but it wasn't in Philistine, which is also a place where David went to find refuge at one point. And so he's on the run, and he's in a cave. A cave is the place, it's the best place that he feels safe. People are out to get him. And we can read a little bit about this experience in 1 Samuel 22. 1 Samuel 22 talks about this cave experience. It says this, David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's houses heard it, they went down there to him, and everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him. And he became captain over them. And there were with him about 400 men. I find that description so intriguing when you consider the psalm we just read. Here's David's in a place of despair and a sense of loneliness. No one cares for my soul, he says. And you realize that in that place, he is attracted to himself those who are distressed, those who are in debt, those who are bitter of soul. And this was the beginning of his company of followers. And we also see there's probably some exaggeration here because David's saying, I'm completely alone, no one cares for me, and yet there's 400 people, including his father and his brothers who have come to him and have sought shelter with him. So he's not actually quite alone, and it's not like nobody cares for him, but he feels that, and so he expresses it honestly to the Lord. This reminds me a little bit of the movie Inside Out. I don't know if you've seen that. They've just come out with a second one, Inside Out 2. I won't talk about Inside Out 2. I'll talk about Inside Out 1, so it's been long enough that any spoilers, I apologize. I'm going to spoil it a little bit. I highly recommend the movie, though. It's about a preteen girl, Riley, who has characters living in her head, and those characters are different emotions. Like joy is one of the main characters, sadness, fear, anger, and I think disgust. And it follows these characters as Riley has to move from her home in Minnesota to a new home in San Francisco because her dad got a new job. And it follows kind of these characters in her head who are trying to wrestle with this change in her life. And these characters kind of control Riley. And Joy is the main character. She's always been the one primarily in charge of Riley's life. Riley's life has been dominated by Joy. And as they go on this journey, Joy really doesn't like sadness. She finds her very annoying. And so she always gives sadness a job to like read manuals or stand in the corner or just go lie down somewhere. She's always giving sadness like odd jobs away from the console that controls Riley's feelings. She doesn't want sadness to have any input. Anyway, in the process, things go wrong, and Joy and sadness find themselves kind of abandoned in the back of Riley's mind. And Riley is without joy and without sadness, and she kind of gets really numb and is trying to run away from home. And the movie follows Joy and sadness and their journey back to the console of Riley's mind. And it's a fascinating journey in which Joy discovers that sadness isn't so bad. She discovers that actually sadness is necessary. That sadness, it's when sadness takes control of Riley's console that Riley receives the help that she needs. That she grows in her relationship with those around her who love her and want to help her. And Joy begins to realize that sadness is an important part of the emotional team. And during this journey, there's a really sad part of the movie. And everyone in the audience gets a little choked up. I got really choked up. And I was there with my some of my kids. And one of my kids, at this sad point in the movie, just burst out in a full-blown wailing crying in the middle of the theater. Okay, we're in the theater. Just like top of their lungs, crying. My father says, shh, immediate, stop crying. You're going to wreck the movie, stop crying. And I'm like having this conversation, Dad, the point of the movie is sadness is the hero. Like, we need to let this happen. As I put my arm around my child and try and bring comfort, I'm also choked up. And so me and my dad are trying to have this existential conversation in the middle of the movie while my son is, I gave his identity away, while he's bawling. And this happens in my life. I do this to myself. And we do this to one another often in the church, I think. Someone comes and they're like, I'm really sad. And I'm like, shh, it's okay. Everything's going to be fine. But David teaches us something. These Psalms teach us something. Eugene Peterson says, the Psalms are what remind us in the Bible that it's okay to be human. Eugene Peterson said the Psalms were his favorite book for that reason. That they remind us, they teach us that it's okay to be human. Walter Brueggemann is a famous Old Testament scholar in the States, and he uses a very simple way of breaking down and categorizing the Psalms for us. And I'm going to share this with you. He says there's 3 types of Psalms. There's a Psalm of orientation. That's when everything seems to be going well, our life seems well-oriented, we make sense of it. And these are the Psalms that teach us things. They're Psalms of wisdom. Perhaps they're reflection Psalms. So like Psalm 1 is a Psalm of wisdom, that it's wise to be in the Scriptures and to plant ourselves near to God. Psalm 139 is a reflection Psalm. Oh, I'm fearfully made. I'm wonderfully made. Where can I go where I'd be hidden from you, God? Like, you have made me, you've created me, you're with me. Psalm 119 is a reflection psalm on the beauty of God's word. These are psalms that are born out of orientation. They're psalms of disorientation. This is when we feel alone, abandoned, distressed, when there's grief in our life. And these psalms are born out of that space. Psalm 13 is maybe one of the simplest and most structurally simple to read through. I'd highly encourage, if you want to study what Psalms of disorientation look like, start in Psalm 13. There's Psalms of confession, like Psalm 51. And then there's Psalms of reorientation. And these are Psalms where God has shown up in our life and saved us in some way, and they're full of thanksgiving and praise. And these Psalms are like Psalm 18, or interestingly, the last 6 Psalms of the book are all Psalms of praise and thanksgiving. And so Psalm 142, where does it land? It is one of these Psalms of disorientation. And when you think about these 3 kind of just really simple orientation, disorientation, reorientation, this is the human experience, right? If you think about relationship, any relationship that you have, but I'll pick on marriage a little bit because it's easy. There's not that marriage is easy, but picking on it is. So you can think of in a time of orientation, it's kind of like we use this phrase honeymoon phase. Things are it's good. Life is good. It's a time of learning and reflection. And sometimes it lasts a few weeks, and sometimes it lasts a few years, but there's this sense of everything is good. I love this. This is good, and I can understand it, and I can understand more. I can learn. I feel safe, and I'm moving forward. And then there's something that happens in a married couple's journey, some stress. They could take many different forms. Some kind of disorientation, and things get hard. And we have a few options. We can ignore it, pretend like we don't have feelings about it. We can run away from it. Or we can address it. We can talk about it. And any counselor would say that if there's distress or stress in a relationship, that ignoring it and running from it are generally unhealthy and that addressing it is healthy. There's something about talking about our distress that is healthy. And if we get through it, then there's a leveling up. There's like this reorientation. There's like this newfound respect and care and love for the other person because you've gone through something difficult and you've seen each other through. There's a sense of these vows actually meant something. Our friendship is built on more than just good times. We've been through something hard and we've come through the other side. And just like our human relationships, our relationship with God is no different. It actually requires us to go through these seasons of disorientation in order to level up, in order to reach that new level of love and care and understanding and trust and all those good words. They require us to go through these difficult times, these times of disorientation. But we don't spend a lot of time in it because the Psalms of disorientation are actually quite uncomfortable, especially if you're not in a season of disorientation. If you are in a season of disorientation, these Psalms tend to be very comforting. And that's one, if you wonder, am I in a season of disorientation or orientation? You can read a Psalm like 142 and say, oh, that resonates with me. Or it'd be like, oh, why would we spend any time there? This is not where I am. And it kind of acts like a mirror, these Psalms. But they invite us into a place of honesty. That's what they do. This is why they're so important for us today, these Psalms of disorientation. They invite us into a healthy honesty with God. They are full of hyperbole and raw emotion. I don't know if you've ever had somebody who's maybe a skeptic and they read one of these Psalms and they're like, your God endorses dashing of babies and breaking of teeth. There's Psalms in here where the psalmist is asking God for vengeance. And you think, and they think, Christians ought not to think that way. And they're absolutely right. Christians ought not to think that way. But we do. And when we do, we bring it to God. I don't know if you can imagine two siblings maybe playing in the backyard. And invariably, one of them gets hurt. And they come into the house, and they find their parent, and then maybe the tears start, or maybe they were already starting, but there's tears, and there's anger, and there's sadness, and there's pain, and there's a little scratch that requires a Band-Aid and a kiss and a hug. And that would be great if it was enough, but often the one sibling who has been hurt says something like this: Mommy, I won't be happy until you punish my brother. They shouldn't get dessert for a week because of what they did to me. They should never appreciate that you're hurt and that you feel sad and betrayed. Why don't you leave the punishment to me? Why don't you move? Take action. Do something terrible to that person that's hurt me. And God is saying, you can leave that with me. You can leave that with me. It invites us into this honest and healthy relationship with God to pray these prayers of disorientation when we feel like we are alone or abandoned or hurt or distressed. Secondly, they teach us to pray as Jesus taught us to pray. Jesus prayed these prayers, one, but second, he actually taught us to pray these prayers. In Luke 18, he tells this fascinating story of a widow and an unjust judge. Perhaps you've heard the story. It's a simple story. This widow, who is a social outcast in her culture, demanded justice, but she wasn't getting it. The judge was not just. He wanted to play golf more than he wanted to adjudicate her case. But she would not give up. And so she kept coming to him. She'd find him maybe at the 9th hole and say, hey, I deserve justice. Give me justice. And she kept coming to him and kept coming to him. And eventually he was worn out by her persistence. And he said, okay, I will grant you justice. And Jesus says, how much more will God listen to you if you come to him with persistence in your complaint. There's something in it. It's a kind of a weird story because God isn't unjust. But in this story, Jesus is comparing God to the judge, to the unjust judge. And he says, how much more will God listen to you? But when he returns, Jesus said, will he find faith? Will he find heart in his people? There's something about the persevering coming before God, even in complaint, and requesting justice that builds in us heart, that develops heart in us. So Jesus teaches us to pray. He models it this. You can even think about Jesus' life and ministry in orientation, disorientation, reorientation. In his 3 years of ministry, there was teaching, there was learning, there were miracles, there was a sense of order and growth and forward going. It was oriented. And then obviously disorientation comes in the week of suffering in Jerusalem and begins with that powerful scene in the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus comes before God and says, if there's any other way, can we do that, please? Please, 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 I do not want to do this. If there's any other way, God, 3 times he goes before God and says, Father, let's have another think. Let's do this differently. And then on the cross, he quotes one of the Psalms of disorientation. And most theologians believe that the gospel writers just put the first line in there, but it was understood that Jesus was probably had memorized and was reciting the whole Psalm of 22. And so we read that on Good Friday often. Psalm 22 seems to come right out of Jesus' mouth. My God, why have you forsaken me? My God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus draws for us an example that in those moments of distress and a sense of abandonment, that we can come before God just as his own son does and complain. Thirdly, these Psalms in some way seem to move God. They seem to move God and they seem to move us. And I say the word seem because God is not a math formula, I've learned. You can't do one thing plus another thing and you always get the same action. It's a relationship. And who in your life can you control by just doing the same thing over and over again and knowing that they're going to come out just like a baked cake or something? God is not a recipe. He's not a math formula. He is a person. And there's a relationship that when we come to him and we express our honest feelings, he is moved. And we are moved. Something seems to happen. It doesn't always go the way we want. And sometimes it takes time. Most scholars believe that David was in that cave, or at least on the run, using that cave as a base, or on the run, whether it be in Philistine or elsewhere in the country. He was on the run for about 7 years. And many of these psalms were developed in that time, these psalms of distress and disorientation. And we read them in about 45 seconds. And we think that David went from a place of distress to a place of praise in 45 seconds, when they may have taken 7 years to write. And I think that's instructive to us, because if there's somebody in your life, or even you might be thinking, I have to move, I have to turn this prayer of complaint around quickly. It doesn't always happen fast. It doesn't always happen fast. But there is almost always a turning point in these Psalms. There's only one Psalm of lament, I think it's Psalm 88, that has no turning point. it starts bad and it ends bad, and there's nothing good about it in the middle. It's just all bleak. But all the other Psalms of disorientation do have a turning point, a place where the author turns and says, but I will praise you. You will be faithful. I believe you have shown up. Sometimes it's past tense, sometimes it's future tense. But there is a turning point. It's a dialogical turning point, a conversation where all of a sudden the tone shifts and something happens and God is praised. But it takes time. Jesus didn't change his prayer on the cross. Saturday had to happen, and then Sunday came, and there was reorientation. For us, maybe it's a weekend, but maybe it's a decade. A time of persistently saying, God, where are you? Bring justice in my life. Save me. I will praise you, but I need you to show up. In my life, part of the reason I jumped off that corporate ladder was I was just worn out. I was worn out in leadership and needed a break, physically, spiritually. And over the last 5 or 6 years, I've been in this strange place where old patterns of my spirituality don't seem to draw me close to God anymore. And I've been in this season for about 5 years where I'm just like, okay, God, I used to sing this song and it moved me, and now I sing it and it's just, I don't know. There's things in my life that I used to do that I felt like God was my warrior and he was right beside me. We were in battle together. And now if I go into those places of battle, I'm like, okay, where are you? Where's my shield mate that I became so accustomed to in seasons past? There's hints. It's like God and I are on this little game of hide and seek, and every once in a while I find him, and those moments are beautiful and wonderful. And yet there's moments where I can't find him. And I wonder, why the heck are you hiding? I've spent my life ministering for you. I gave up things so that I could tell people about how awesome you are. And I can't find you. And so this is very personal for me. There's these Psalms have become rich parts of my prayer life because without them, I'm not sure where to go. And like I said, there's moments where God gives glimpses and it's as if he's leading me into some new place. And I do believe that there's a level up coming, much like a video game. There's some sense of, I think there will be a level up. There's some maturity, some new orientation, some reorientation that will happen. I do believe that and I trust it and I know God is faithful. But I long for his nearness and wonder on many days why he doesn't seem to long for the same. What is your complaint? What are you suffering? Have you stuffed it? Have you had an honest conversation with God? Have you told him how you feel? Perhaps you feel great and life is currently very well oriented and God is near. These Psalms can be helpful to you as you pray for someone else. As I read Psalm 142 to you today, who came to mind? Was there someone that these words seemed to match up for? Someone who maybe you know, who feels like they are alone? Like there's no one who cares for their soul. Could you pray this prayer for them You see, these are two ways we can apply this psalm to our life. We can pray it for ourselves. We can pray it for others. There's also ways of corporately lamenting. And we're going to end our time today with that, with a corporate lament, where I'm just going to lead you in a prayer, and I'm going to have a little bit of silence where you can kind of express your complaint to God. And I noticed this significantly during COVID. COVID was a shared experience, something that we all had in common. And I found as I met with people, there was a shared grief, a shared complaint, a shared lament, the social isolation, the sense of loss that we shared together. And the prayer times we had often gravitated back to that place, and there was a very natural way that we gathered around and lamented together, socially distanced. But we find ourselves in a similar place this morning, as been referenced many times. There's maybe it's not quite as serious on a global scale, but there's something very important about Jasper to our community, to our province. It represents a place where many memories have been formed, a place of joy, a place where creation was on display and the glory of God was near to us and is near to us. And so we grieve as a community at the loss. And we need to negotiate with God. This is the formula of a prayer of lament. There's the complaint. There's a negotiation where we ask God to show up and we tell him why that's important. And then there's a turning point. Very simply, that's how I would say, very simply, those are the three elements of a lament prayer. A complaint, a negotiation, and a turning point. And so we're going to pray together. And I'll lead you through that. Last night, Nancy and I were just flipping through photos on our phone. We just, your iPhone can do this. You can type in Jasper on your phone. And if you've been there and taken pictures there, then your iPhone will bring all the photos of Jasper to the front, and you can just flip through them. And so we were doing this. And we just realized how many memories we had in that place. How many times we'd been with our kids or with friends. And how meaningful those times were. And perhaps whether you do it on your phone or even just in your mind, you can think of times as a kid or with your own kids or times with friends that you spent in that town and in that place. And I just invite you to call those things to memory. And join me in prayer. With our voice we cry out, O Lord. With our voice we plead for mercy. We pour out our complaint to you, and we tell you of our trouble. O God, for many of us, the town of Jasper represents more than brick and mortar and wood. A place of memories made, of laughter, of discovery, even of worship, O God. And we grieve. That has changed. We think of those who have lost homes. More than houses, they've lost places where they grew up, where they entertained, where they loved. And it's gone. Lord, we wonder, where were you? Why not protect a place that so clearly declared your majesty? We ask that you would move, that you would show your glory as the whole world watches. Show us something of yourself in this disaster. Bring comfort to those who mourn. Restore those who have lost. Lord, we look at the forests and recognize that in time they regrow. We know that buildings can be rebuilt, and so we thank you for the lack of loss of life. And we trust that somewhere in here you will show up, that you will show yourself faithful, that you will once again be glorified in that place. Come and see the wonder of your creation. We trust you will do this. We ask that you would grant us patience and hope in the journey